What event or incident happened at your job that caused a mass firing or mass quitting? By Brian_Young.
FalstaffsMind says, I work in local government for an urban county. One of the IT departments reclassified all their employees as exempt, a designation designed for political appointments, fired them all. Only exempt employees can be fired without cause, and asked them to submit resumes if they wanted their jobs back. Their goal was to get rid of some employees they felt were dead weight. But it turns out, the most valued employees, the ones with readily marketable skills in the prime of their careers, just shook their heads and had jobs elsewhere by the end of the week. Furthermore, when you pull a stunt like that, word gets out, and resumes don't come flooding in. They are still trying to recover.
A well-dressed man says, I was the lead cook in a $1 million kitchen at a multi-million-dollar high-end restaurant. The executive chef had been there since they opened and worked his way from the bottom to the top in 4 years. That place was his whole life and he was completely dedicated to it. The absentee owners had hired a do-nothing, know-nothing manager. After weeks of complaining, the owners had a meeting with the manager and gave him a week to get on top of his job. The chef went on vacation that week. The manager saw that as an opportunity to buddy up with owners. A week and 2 rounds of golf later the chef comes back to work to a pink slip. 2730 employees came in and resigned immediately after.
Ibuildwebstuff says, I used to be a senior staff member at a web agency where the owner was completely bonkers. She'd already managed to run a previous agency into the ground and was in the process of doing the same to her current one. We were at crisis stage. We'd just about made staff wages for the month. I and another senior staff member had deferred hours to make sure all the regular staff got theirs. We had one big client who was providing about 90% of our revenue. That client was getting pissed as we were behind on a couple of projects as idiot owner lady had promised them unreasonable deadlines without consulting the team. So I have everyone working flat out. Weekend plans are cancelled. This is real crunch time, we need to keep this client. So boss lady shows up, late as always, and sends all the staff home with full pay. This is at 11 a.m. She wants to have an urgent planning meeting with just the senior staff. Of course we had to do this on the studio floor, not the boardroom, as the studio had the big whiteboard. So she sent everyone home as it required total privacy. We're 15 minutes into the meeting. I shit you not, all she had currently written on the board was synergy, ideas, excitement, when she declared that whoops, she'd forgotten she had a hair appointment and fucking left. Oh, and as a parting gift she asked the senior staff members to spend the rest of the day moving around the office furniture into a new layout, most of which was screwed to the floor, as she thought it would energize and mix things up when the guys came back to work the next day. As soon as she left, the entire senior management staff decided to quit. We checked the incomings for that month, made sure everyone got paid, and then resigned. 60% of the agency resigned on the same day.
Woogya says, all the engineers at one job I was in had their contracts changed to that they had to buy their own tools. Due to the specialist nature of our jobs, we were all looking at over $4,000 per engineer. 10 walked and the rest threatened to strike. The boss had to give in and buy the tools himself.
Genida says, train company in Sweden. One day many years ago someone found a document stating some changes to overtime policy. It was just lying on a table in the middle of the break room. One copy only. Due to the nature of the business, there tends to be a lot of shifting hours back and forth. Sometimes we, drivers, can get home hours and hours early, and other times we get horrendously late. Hence overtime. This document stated that now overtime forms had to be filled for when we came home early. Undertime, so to speak. This otherwise already scheduled time would be withdrawn and the company would then be able to reuse that time. Negative overtime. One copy on a table, and a few hours later people had come in from all over in a major huff. There were outright and immediate resignations, shouting matches, phone calls to union representatives, a huge outcry overall. Date on the document and the day it was found, April 1st. Much fun was had.
Bocefusly says, in the early 90s I worked for a large construction company in Florida. I was on the road crew. One of the machines we used was called a mixer. The objective of this machine was to mix up the subgrade of the road. It has giant teeth that spin insanely fast. Well, my crew had laid down the dirt, lime rock and clay and now had to run the mixer over it. Well, someone set the blades too low and ripped an international fiber optic cable out of the ground. A clean cut would have been bad, but this cable was shredded beyond belief. It cost $100,000 per hour that this cable was down. Luckily I wasn't at work that day. When I came in the next day, anyone who was even near the incident got fired. My whole crew was extinct. To put into perspective, the cable was fatter than your upper leg and composed of thousands of glass strands. Every strand had to be fused back together. It cost the company millions. Total about 40 people were fired and I was put on another crew. Edit: a lot of you are messaging me confusing a millet machine with a mixer. A millet machine only removes a layer of asphalt from the road for repaving. A road construction mixer is like a giant garden tiller that mixes up the different materials for the subgrade before the asphalt. It goes way deeper and combines different layers of clay, lime rock and dirt.
PoolsidePirate says, I used to work at a pickle factory in Michigan. When the new owners took over, they insisted they change the recipe that had been the same for over 50 years without consulting the workers. Some of the employees' parents and grandparents had worked there and apparently felt so strongly about the recipe that 13 people quit and the majority else were outside with signs the next days until eventually they switched it almost all the way back. None of those who quit came back. Edit: I didn't quit, and actually enjoyed both recipes. But, now I can't tolerate the smell or taste of pickles. I used to love them. Skeptical.
PatrickRsGhost says, from what I understood, I caused a domino effect at a local big chain pizza place. The pizza place I worked at wasn't a full-service restaurant, which they're mainly known for. It was a takeout or delivery-only store, located in a shopping center with several other businesses. During the 2 years I worked there, we had gone through 3 store managers. The first manager was awesome. He was firm, strict, but fair. The second manager was a bit of a ditz. He went by the book, but you could tell his heart wasn't really in it. I think he preferred to be a driver than a manager. The third manager was an all-out bitch. She mistreated the employees, especially the men, and she'd do things that only benefited her, not others. I was getting fed up. She had put a suggestion box outside her office. I wrote a very lengthy suggestion that she treat her employees with respect. She basically fired me. She said I'd resigned. I didn't care. I was no longer under her tyrannical rule. A friend of mine who still worked there called me a week later and told me 3 other people quit because, like me, they got tired of her shit. Later that same year, I quit late summer, about 2 weeks after Halloween. My parents ordered a pizza from that pizza place's major competitor. They asked me to give the driver the money, and when I did, it turned out to be a driver I knew from the other place. She told me she quit on Halloween night because she wanted to take her 4-year-old trick-or-treating, but the manager said no. Then she, the manager, took off early, in the middle of a fucking rush, to take her own 8-year-old daughter trick-or-treating. The driver that was now working for the competitor told me she threw her hat at the manager, told her to fuck off, and quit right there. A year or 2 later, I ran into the old assistant manager, who was now working at an Arby's. She told me many others had quit, and that manager was no longer there. She and her husband were fired, due to stealing money from that store. Karma, it works, bitches.
DouglasYancyFunnie says, Michael Jackson died at eye hospital. There were many HIPAA violations, as doctors, nurses and staff all kept leaking information to their friends/family, and to the media, specifically TMZ.
flamingopinknutsack says, I worked at a Dave & Buster's in a fairly low-income area. We had parties of 8 or more come in regularly, and they would run up $200 checks, which was fine since they had an automatic 18% gratuity for being such a large party. They decided to eliminate the large party gratuity option in hopes that it would inspire servers to work harder. Instead, we all started getting regularly stiffed on these massive checks. Within 3 weeks, over a third of our staff quit.
rspeed says, oh boy.
I think I might have a story that wins this thread, but I'm way too late to this party. When I was in high school, I took a part-time job doing tech support for a dial-up ISP. The company was pretty small, and only had a handful of employees. The owner's wife did HR and accounting, her brother was in charge of the technical operations, and was my boss, plus a web developer and the regular tech support guy, who were best friends. There were also a handful of developers at a sister company which develops custom software. My work schedule was evenings a few days per week plus normal hours on the weekend. My boss was usually there before me on Saturdays, but one week I was surprised to find the office locked. As the day progressed, I became increasingly confused by the fact that nobody else had shown up. There was almost always a few people at least passing through, but I'd been there all morning without seeing anyone at all. Finally, after a few hours, my boss walks in and said, "You're probably wondering where everyone is." He told me that everyone except me, the owner, and his wife had quit. He wouldn't say why, but assured me that it wasn't something I needed to worry about, and that, since his job was vital, he was going to stay at the company until a replacement could be found. I tried to find out what was happening, but he said I'd have to talk to the owner. When the owner arrived, there was clearly tension between the two of them. He also wouldn't tell me what had happened, but was very eager to make sure I wasn't going to jump ship. Eventually they hired new employees and found a replacement for my boss, and things went back to normal. But I still didn't have any idea what the hell had happened, and the owner clearly wasn't interested in discussing it. Cut to a few months later. I'm walking around the show floor at the Macworld conference in New York when I bump into the former tech support guy and former web developer. We spent a few minutes catching up, then the tech support guy grins and says, "Tech, so do you know what happened? Why everyone quit?" Me, no, but I've certainly been curious. Owner didn't tell me and I didn't want to pry. Tech, he and his wife got excommunicated. Me, blank stare / Tech, didn't you know we're all Jehovah's Witnesses? Apparently everyone knew each other from church, and Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to have anything to do with people who have been excommunicated. It wasn't until years later that I learned that the owner and his wife were swingers, and someone in the church found out. Thanks for the gold, stranger. Yay, my first double gilding. Who knew my ridiculous employment adventure would finally pay off all these years later?
Imboredsohereiam says, "My company has had a pay freeze for over 7 years. We've had 10+ employees quit in our office due to this. The work is rather hard and we are expected to work up to state standards, yet we are paid near minimum wage. We have patients' lives in our hands, for fuck's sake."
Abhikavi says, "A friend of mine quit his job a year ago after the company was bought out by a place in Ohio that announced several things. Engineers would receive no raises in the foreseeable future because engineering was not the company's sole purpose. They slashed healthcare to the bone, and they changed dental plans to Delta, Ohio. Friend lives in MA, where nearly nothing was covered. His leaving was followed by nearly 1/4 of the engineering staff."
HeroShitInc says, several things are happening right now. Mandated 36-hour shifts. Mandated overtime shifts changed from 2 a month to 6 to 8 a month. Refusal to allow people to go part-time. We have lost and will lose 15 to 20 people by the end of the month.
Drunken_black_belt says, "Gather round, children, and let me regale you with a tale of retail misery and woe. About 7 years back I worked at Best Buy. My store was located across from one of the busiest malls in the Northeast, in an area that was a mix of lower and upper class. Around July, the store started doing one of those promotions wherein they offer you magazines at checkout. You sign up for 5 free ones, and then if you don't cancel you start getting charged the yearly subscription fee for them. The cashiers were incentivized to get as many magazine subscriptions as possible. As I worked loss prevention, I really didn't care at all about this program. I didn't care until October. Suddenly we started getting massive complaints about people getting charged for subscriptions who never signed up for them. It started as 1 or 2, and we just assumed they forgot to cancel. But soon, several dozen angry customers were complaining to us, corporate, and anyone who would listen. We started an investigation. Lots of art and shitty hours going through camera footage and register logs. Turns out, one of the cashiers, who was never an OK employee even on her best day, figured out she could just sign people up for the magazines, even if they said no, as long as they were a rewards card member and their info was in the system. She used this to get record number of subscriptions, and won the weekly prizes every week. Until the other cashiers caught on, and started doing the same. In the end, it turns out that every single front register area cashier had done this, except for one kid who was hired a few weeks before the investigation. Word came down from corporate that we had to fire every single cashier except for the new kid. Oh, and the day they handed down this judgment? The Friday before Black Friday. That's right. With 1 week to spare before the biggest shopping day of the year, we were ordered to fire all of our cashiers. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with management, but their hands were tied. So we tried to hire and train as many people as we could in a week. But as you can imagine, that Black Friday was chaos. Some employees worked 20 hours straight. 10 in their department and 10 on front register. All managers and supervisors worked close to 24 hours. They even tried to convince LP to lend a hand, to which we laughed of course. I don't want to know how much they lost between the lawsuits from the customers for fraud, and the labor board fines and complaints filed by employees held late on Black Friday. TL, Doctor abandoned ship.
Deleted says, I worked for an $800 million/year system integrator in the Southeast. Each department had 2 leads. The first was typically an MBA who served as a liaison to sales and marketing. The second was the engineering lead that was responsible for platform integration, testing, and coordinating with the support and network services teams. I was the engineering lead. Our VP was one of those guys who promotes a hyper-competitive environment and wanted the company to staffed with sharks not sheep. When I got there, what little documentation there was on systems and processes was horribly outdated or non-existent. I changed all of that, worked obscene hours, and I would personally travel to high-revenue client sites if there were problems. That work paid off with a $22 million rugged server contract. At this point, I had served 3 years with this company. It wasn't that old, and I climbed the ranks fast. I was making new college grad pay, which was about $6,000 below the median household income for my area. I know what you're thinking. Engineering team lead with a dismal salary? The job market wasn't great here, so at that point I was just happy to get my first job. This isn't the place you stay to work in any form of engineering or technology, but I wasn't ready to leave yet. I asked for a raise, and honestly I was only hoping for $1 or $2 an hour raise. I was told that they couldn't do it. Keep in mind I had been working 50 to 60-hour weeks, training the support team on systems, and assisting network engineers in the field. The stress level was unbearable, and it pretty much destroyed my first marriage. I felt really defeated. Fast forward about 3 weeks, and a friend in the field asks me if I'd be interested in doing backups, server maintenance, and interface work for a hospital. He said the pay isn't amazing, but it would be a lot more laid back. At that point, it sounded like heaven. When I put in my notice, the VP completely freaked out. He said, "If this is about money, we can get you more money." This is literally about 3 weeks after he told me they couldn't give me a minimal raise. I said that I had already accepted the job, and he offered to double my salary. I was completely floored, but I was also really pissed off. I quit on principle. I spent my last 2 weeks making sure my partner and subordinates knew how things were done, where documentation was, and I did a DoD grade wipe of my desktop system when I left. In a complete lack of oversight, they didn't kill my VPN access or email accounts. I thought it was weird, but I figured I'd check my email for a while after I left to make sure that I notified any senders of personal email that I didn't have that address anymore. I then noticed that someone was sending email and signing it with my name. They were even referencing events from interactions I had with some of these people. Needless to say, I set up an auto-respond email on a Friday after I was sure everybody had gone home. I typically got hundreds of emails over the weekend, and they all got an automated response that I hadn't been employed with the company for over a month and left a forwarding address. My former coworkers heard about it, and they thought it was shady as hell. They had also tried to push all of my old work onto them, and one of the guys that I hung around with socially and still do, told me that they told one guy that he couldn't leave on time one day to see a play his daughter was in. It was an event he told them about weeks in advance. That's when the domino effect began. Within the span of a month, the other manager, the team leads, the specialists, and the techs had all quit. There was no more enterprise products engineering department. They hired some kids fresh out of college that ran it into the ground, and subsequently, they lost every single CNE, MCSE, and CC. They were super sharp guys when it came to networking, but they needed support on the back end for enterprise hardware. I have never felt so vindicated in my life. I've heard that after that, the VP was moved out of a management position. They asked me to come back more than once, and I refused. I stopped answering their calls. I actually made a little less than I did there at the new job, but now I make about twice what they paid me. I'm also fully vested for retirement and have much better benefits. I guess the double salary thing paid off in the long run, and I went back to school to get another degree. I'm 3 classes from finishing, and I really like this job. I really like my team and the creative freedom I have, too. TL, Dr. VP promotes a hostile environment, doesn't reward employees, makes no consideration for employees spending time with their families, and I quit. They offered to double my salary when I quit, and my entire department slowly quits afterward. Followed by the upper echelon network engineers.
TheSynod says, after 2 years of belt tightening, wage reductions and broken promises, myself and a few others who remained on the job were told that the company didn't have any money. Then the owner's prick son rented a villa in Tuscany for 3 weeks, and his scumbag father used miles he accumulated on the company's dime. He flies first class from Florida to NY for meetings that could be done with a phone call. Now we know why, to fly the entire family there. Currently one partner is gearing up for a lawsuit, contract fraud, and myself and other former employees are gearing up to sue for wage theft. If you're crying poverty, don't vacation in a fucking Tuscan villa.
Freebase 1K says. In a team of 30 IT consultants that had been working a big project for a couple years. The standing offer that governed rates, etc. had been defined and would continue for the next few years. But the renewal deadline for each of our individual contracts with the contracting company, middleman, was just a week away and we hadn't seen the paperwork, just promises that we were being renewed. Finally get the paperwork and see a 10% cut in rates. Quite surprised because the standing offer didn't have any such change. Contracting company says the client department renegotiated new rates by saying that another company could be used instead. We were shocked that the client would put such a big project at risk. People made inquiries. It turns out the client department made no such changes. The contracting company was just making a grab for a bigger piece of the pie. There was outrage. People quit. Other yelled and got fired, etc. The company had to quickly backpedal and claim it was an administrative error. Yeah, right. But the damage was done. It didn't end there though. About 6 months later, a small group of consultants on another project merged with us. They had been working under the same contract vehicle. As we're getting to know these 5 guys, one of them says, that 30% cut 6 months ago was nasty, eh? Turns out the company got from these guys what they couldn't get from us, and these poor suckers hadn't known it was a fiction. Shit hits the fan once again. The 5 quit en masse. Problem was their jobs were critical. They got hired back with hefty raises, almost double their original if memory serves. Stupid, greedy company.
Jaeya says. My old workplace decided to do a complete overhaul of everyone's rotas. They went through an entire consultation period, asking people what they could and couldn't work, then completely ignored everyone's preferences and allocated shifts and rotas entirely based on the company's needs, completely invalidating the entire consultation period. People were being asked/expected to work more unsociable hours and weekends, and nobody was pleased by these changes. A lot of people left.
Altarocks says, I worked in the corporate headquarters for a large national retailer. After 20 years in business, the company was sold to an arrogant billionaire who put his son in charge, his first job after completing his MBA. The son decided to relocate headquarters 500 miles away, close to his daddy's headquarters. He gave us 30 days notice to move with no moving compensation or lose our jobs. Out of 300 employees, 1 moved. I had already been looking for a job, the writing was on the wall. I accepted a new position the day after the announcement and gave 2 weeks' notice. My boss went ballistic, said, "What are we supported to do? No one can fill your job here and we won't have anyone new until we move. You're not a team player." Bonus, the company was out of business within 60 days after the move, 4 months after the acquisition. They had spent $50 million to buy it.
GreedE says, "Someone pissed in a water ink in the storeroom when I worked in a Kmart. No one said some forward about it, so all the stocking staff who were on night got sacked."
OiMcCoy says, "I used to work on cruise ships. Over 50 of the dining room staff testing positive for coke. They were all gone the next day."
sometimesballerina says, "Our general manager was fired, everyone loved him, and they brought in a new GM who took away ending times to shifts. We had to stay until he said we could go, while most of us were college students trying to schedule classes, and all of the employee perks. We even had to pay full price on dollar sub day. Everyone quit. There was only 2 of the same people working there 2 months later."
Stahrk says, "Worked in a bar in a nightclub. Restaurant by day, club by night. 5 bartenders behind the bar on any given Friday and Saturday, plus bar backs. Thought something was weird about our credit card tips, went to bar manager. We collect receipts and checkouts plus paychecks for a few weeks, examine them. Someone is withholding quite a bit of our tips. Fast forward to a Friday night, busy as fuck. Owner comes in to see how things are going, bar manager confronts him. Owner denies wrongdoing, claims what he's doing is legal, it wasn't, he was pocketing the withheld tips. Bar manager signals for me to come over, threatens to quit if the owner doesn't return the money he stole. Owner more or less says tough shit, bar manager walks out. I lean into the bar lan enough to tell one of the other bartenders what happened, give the owner a snarky wave, and follow him out. 5 minutes later, the rest of the bar staff joins us, and we wander down the road to another bar to commiserate over the bullshit. Left over 500 people in the club with no bar staff. 0 fucks given. Found out a few days later that the daytime serving staff heard what happened and quit too. Last I heard, they had to shut down for a few weeks to restaff. Still overly proud of myself for that. Fuck that guy."
N8 the GR8 says, "I was in the Navy for 6 years, and I say all people get kicked out for various reasons. Some people were using a closet as a paint storage room, smoke break room. It caught fire, and we nearly lost the ship. The CO, XO, and everyone involved were canned. I've posted a more in-depth description of this event before. Edit: since people are asking me about the fire, here's the other comment I made, /edit. I was a nuclear reactor operator. The nuclear power operators are continuously having their level of knowledge about nuclear physics and reactor operations tested. I'm not talking multiple choice questions, either. Every question was essay style. This incentivizes cheating, and cheating rings are busted up frequently. The machinery division and the training division on my ship lost a bunch of people due to a cheating ring. There is no tolerance policy for drugs in the military, and we lost 3 people in a drug sweep once. 2 for marijuana, and 1 for coke. Edit: one more I just remembered. At the Nuclear Training Command, there was a guy with a lot of drug offenses on his record. He got waivers for them, so no big deal. During the routine background check, it was discovered that he forgot to include an offense. The command took him off to the side and the TL, doctor of what they told him was this: "We know you're still doing drugs, and doing them with people here on base, because you're a shitty person and lied on your enlistment paperwork. We're going to kick you out of the military with a dishonorable discharge unless you tell us who you're doing drugs with. If you tell us, we'll just kick you out with another than honorable." The difference between dishonorable and OTH is that under a dishonorable discharge you are considered a felon. Edit: this isn't quite accurate. If you are discharged dishonorably, you aren't exactly considered a felon. You do lose all VA, GI, and tuition assistance benefits, and it's a permanent mark on your job record. You also are not eligible for hire by the government, and certain businesses have contracts with the government to not ever hire someone with a dishonorable discharge. McDonald's is one example. /edit. Because of the offer, the guy said he was doing drugs with 5 other people in his class. They were all pulled out of training and put on hold for a few months. They were screened for drugs and questioned. Nothing was uncovered. After a few months, the CO decided that they were untrustworthy anyway, so he kicked them out of the nuclear power program, and sent them as undesignated rates to work on ships. One of the 5 killed himself because of this.
N0 Remax says. We lost a third of our staff over the course of 3 months. People hate where I work, including myself. I work in HR, try having to deal with 100 staff leaving in a short time frame. Generally, people were fed up with the stupid shit that goes on here. False promises, failing to deliver, promising change, keeping poor performers because they're too desperate for staff, hiring stupid fucking people. I did say I work in HR, but I have no pull, I'm just the lowest on the totem pole, practically a glorified secretary. Also I have to be chipper and supportive of the bad decisions that get made around here. I'm convinced my managers don't like me, especially my direct report, because I speak my mind. I want to get the fuck out of here. Job interview of my life is tomorrow, perhaps I can put all this nonsense behind me here. Update 1, first of, holy shit, Reddit, your kindness and belief in me will fuel the fire to tomorrow's interview. Thank you everyone, for your support. I'm so sorry I haven't got back to you yet. I finished work then headed to the airport, which will bring me to the next part of the update. Here's the preamble to this job. I applied to it on a whim. I threw my name in the hat thinking there isn't a chance in hell these guys are going to call me back. Sure enough they did, to which I couldn't even eat that day, and the only words I could say were holy fucking shit, so, I had to do a phone interview with these guys and I knocked it out of the park. I never felt so confident in an interview in my life. I took a huge risk at the end of my interview by making a joke about one of their local sports teams, that happens to have a huge fan base. I said it isn't going to be an issue that I'm not a local sports team fan, is it? And they loved it. Huge risk. I wasn't trying to sound cocky, I just wanted to lighten the situation and it paid off because right now I'm sitting in an airport hotel and getting ready to leave for my flight to interview with these guys tomorrow. It's in a city that's a 9-hour drive from where I currently live, and they're flying me out there. I can't believe it. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. They're flying me out there, yes, but I still have to do an interview tomorrow and it's down to me and probably 2 to 3 other candidates. I will mention I'm the only out-of-area candidate they're flying in. I have to deliver tomorrow and it will be all business, but it happens that I have a real nice green tie that will complement the local sports team's colors. Once again Reddit, I'm grateful for all of your support. You've given me a lot of inspiration with your kindness. I'm going to be listening to this song on the flight on repeat. If you remember the scene, you'll know why. I love you guys. Quick edit, I probably won't get back to you guys until Saturday for the update. Please stay tuned. Update 2. Alright, so now I'm sitting in the airport for my return trip home. The interview went really well, but I feel the examples they asked about, I don't really have any good ones, or simple ones to explain. Overall, I think it went well. But of course, as soon as I was finished with the interview, I just started having my doubts about it. I don't know, I was in the same position a year ago when I applied for my job I have right now, felt the interview wasn't strong but still got the job. I get to sit and wait for 4 to 5 grueling days waiting for the call. I really want this job, it would be a huge step forward for my career and my life. I would get to be in a city, make real money, and start living the life I wanted. Yes, I would be further away from home, as I would be about 14 to 15 hours away from my home. But this is what I set out to do when I finished school, get myself situated and stable, regardless of location. My goals are very financially driven. But N0 Remac, money isn't everything, no, but stability and comfort. Knowing that I won't have to worry about money like I do now is what I really seek. To all you new graduates out there, that are struggling to find a job, I just want to say, keep swinging and don't give up. This job market is so dog-eat-dog, and don't be afraid to make huge sacrifices along the way, like moving away from family and friends. It's not easy to do, but with the right attitude, you can make it happen. Thanks again everyone. I'll give you the results when I've heard. Update 3, tomorrow is the big day. Update 4, and I'm still waiting for the phone call, maybe it's Monday? Update 5, I'm still waiting for that phone call, but I've made my peace. I probably won't be getting this job. Time will tell, when I get my phone call. Final update, I didn't get the job, but I got some amazing experience along the way.
ImJustSaying2 says, it was a mass firing of many of the employees from a distribution center. It was a consumer electronics company, TVs, VCRs, this was in the 1970s, cassette players, amplifiers, tuners, equalizers, etc. I was the parts department supervisor at the time, so I spent my time making sure that repair parts were sent out on a timely basis. The company had 3 categories of stock. A, which was new and could be sold to the retail market. B, which was refurbished and was only sold to a limited market with a limited warranty, and C, which was cosmetically damaged and could only be purchased by employees, and was never supposed to be resold. Prices were dirt cheap just to move the goods so they didn't sit around the warehouse for too long. Senior management got the bright idea of reclassifying A stock to C stock and buying it themselves. They were, of course, reselling the materials to anyone and everyone, including some of the retail stores that they had established relationships with. I knew this was going on, but I was young, married and had a child and a mortgage and simply could not afford to buy anything, even if I could turn a profit on it. So one day a senior VP from corporate headquarters walks in unannounced. We usually had advance notice of their coming in. He walks straight into the branch manager's office without saying anything to anyone and closes the door. About a half hour later the branch manager comes out of his office, white as a ghost, and leaves the building. The SVP, who has now taken over the branch manager's office, sends for the sales manager who goes in, closes the door, and exits about half hour later, also white as a ghost, and he promptly leaves the building. On it goes. Rumors are running rampant, but since each person leaves the building, and this is before cell phones and texting, no one is really sure what is happening. The service manager, my boss, then the office manager, then the quality control manager, the warehouse manager, then they start with the supervisors. Eventually they get around to me, and I'm shitting bricks. So I go into the office and said, "Hi, Dave, I knew him from past meetings, etc., and he immediately asks me what I knew about the C stock sales. I feigned ignorance about what the others were doing and told him that I had all the equipment I needed and could afford, so I hadn't bought any. He tells me that he is firing people who were obviously abusing the employee purchase program and that because I hadn't abused it I would not be let go. But, he says I have to leave the building without saying anything to anyone and to go home until I heard from him. He took down my phone number and away I went. Several hours later Dave calls me back into the building and asks if I am familiar with inventory and cycle counting, and I said sure. We did cycle counting in the parts department regularly and had an annual physical inventory of the entire building once a year. He tells me to schedule one to be done over the upcoming weekend for all the finished goods. He also tells me that I am now the highest-ranking employee at the site and that I would be running the building until they could hire replacements for the individuals that were let go. I ran that building for 4 or 5 months and never even got a raise or promotion, although Dave took my wife and I out to a very expensive dinner as a thank you for keeping my nose clean. Edit. Wow. Sorry for the wall of text. When typing it up I thought I was being concise.
Auto-posting _ system says. Not exactly the same, but. Once at a small company we had this one guy everybody hated who quit infrequently. He would usually go on a bender for a few days and then come back and go back to work like nothing had happened, and the owner didn't say anything about it and neither did he. He and the owner were both acerbic assholes. He made money for the company, and the owner didn't work in the field with him, so I guess he didn't care. Anyway, one day this guy had pissed off a whole bunch of people even more than usual, had a fight with the boss, and quit. 10 minutes later the whole field group, maybe 6 or 7 guys, assembles at the owner's office and says, "Hey, look, You hire the guy back again and we're all quitting. I run into the guy occasionally in the field. He's a contractor, like me. He learned nothing from the experience and is still a piece of shit.
Deleted says, my BF worked at a finance company in Manhattan. He's a web developer. Anyway, his boss announced his wife was pregnant. Barely 3 weeks later he was fired. A woman came back from maternity leave and was fired shortly after. They give awesome severance packages and make him sign a waiver saying they won't sue or talk about it. My BF and half a dozen others have since quit despite the high salaries. I guess half a dozen isn't mass, but the company is startup and barely 40 people.
Deleted says, the government sequester in 2013. I worked for a parts supplier. 95% of our customers were military projects and government contractors. A lot of projects were cancelled, put on hold indefinitely. A lot of people in my company were laid off.
PM_your_feelings says. One guy left. In an office where there are 5 people working, that is 1/5 of the company leaving. That's the best I have _.
Quincess says. At this very moment, most people in my department at the hospital are looking for new jobs at our boss's insistence. The hospital is going to be laying off a bunch of us soon but refuses to tell us how many and when, or even what their criteria will be for deciding.
G8KPR says. This didn't happen to me, however, when I was in college. 2 of my professors worked at Core Entertainment, an animation, special effects company. One day the owner gathered the top people into a boardroom and basically said, we are in a bit of a financial situation, so we can't pay anyone for this month. Just about all the senior people quit that day, and within a week, my 2 professors had jobs elsewhere.
Deleted says. I worked in a tech support call center for some very shitty online backup software. The supervisors treat you like computers. They don't care about your feelings or workload, they just wanted short call times. They didn't care that you were snowed in or bedridden. If you call out, you were written up. The place had a 155% turnover rate 1 year from people having enough. This year is on track for being the same. Personally, I quit when they tried to stop my wedding by calling me 2 days before my wedding and saying my time off wasn't approved. The time that had been put into the system and approved 6 months prior. What sucks is that the business probably won't go under anytime soon. The product trips people off so much that the company is making bank, and the economy is so bad that they know for every call center rep that quits, there's a poor sap that needs to pay rent to take their place. Edit. Yes, I am under an NDA, and since it was a tech support center, there were many people that know of Reddit and would know who I am through my username. They're the kind of company that would send lawyers after me. Also, yes, 155% is the average of what they went through 1 year. For every 2 people they hire, 3 walk out.
ilivlife says. Our company was bought by a larger company. The sales and marketing team got a new boss. Within a week of the first meeting with the new boss, 75% of the team quit. No one outside of the team knew why. A few months later I met the new head of sales and marketing. He was insane. When one of the top sales guys put his 2 weeks notice in, he was escorted off of company property within an hour. The next guy who resigned was told he had to work the rest of the week with no pay so he could transfer his accounts over. Someone in HR had to explain to him that is slavery and illegal. TL, Dr. New Boss was insane and tried to bring slavery back.
Alejandro4891 says. Last year I briefly worked as a caterer. I only managed to work 3 gigs before I quit. The reason being that my boss tried to fit in 12 people into one minivan. He did this because he was charging everyone $10 so he benefited from it. At one point we all decided that it was stupid and reckless for 12 people to be inside a minivan, especially since we were all sitting in the back, Indian style. After arguing with him to get another car, we still went to work. After that day, I and a bunch of other people decided never to work there again.
Mahade says. Web development gig. Just 12 employees. Small firm, but about 200 clients that paid a monthly fee of €500 and they streamed in the necessary amount of work that would keep us all busy. A good 40-hour job for everyone involved. €100,000 a month, basically for free. At €200 per person per hour for custom work, we made crazy money. Practically no costs and. Well, let's summarize the deal here. The owner got himself a brand new Porsche. And then another. And then a Ferrari. He didn't sell cars, he just kept them. He bought himself a huge house with garage boxes capable of storing 20 cars or so. He was flaunting his wealth. So naturally, he was hesitant to hire new employees. They take time to train, and that means he has to pay more money to someone else every month. He didn't make the connection that we'd be able to do more work. So he basically ramped up our workload. We went to 44 hours without much complaint. We didn't know where the work was coming from, but a boost in sales was probably it, right? Let's be happy, more money is good for all of us. Then 47 hours on average. And then 50. 55. 60. Months went by and no new people joined, nobody got a raise, nobody got their overtime paid for, nobody was happy. Nobody was happy. So the tech lead decided he would leave. Then his best friend in the office did, too. Then I did, too. Then the guys I trained did, too. Then all of the others did, too. And all of this was decided within 1 hour. It was supposed to be a retrospective, Scrum, session, but it turned out to be a let's quit meet. We handed in our resignation to him on the spot the very same day, and the 12 of us started a new company by ourselves. We let LinkedIn do its magic. More than 100 customers noticed us all getting together in our own company, and more than 100 customers joined us. It took a few months and we had pretty much all customers working with us. Our old boss was still filthy rich at that point, but he had huge costs each month, too. Turns out, he didn't really buy all those cars, that it cost money, he just leased them. Imagine the costs of 15 or so luxury sports cars, every month. And the cost of the house he was renting, every month. The idiot didn't buy anything because that'd make him responsible for maintaining all that shit, too. 3 years later he was bankrupted. And that was 5 years ago. Last I heard he's an accountant somewhere. He's also remarried. His ex-wife was bloody hot, his new one a great personality.
Omfgi2u says, I worked at a locally owned pizza shop and I can say a combination of poor management and me quitting caused the business to go under completely. When I worked there, this was years ago, I was maybe 15 to 16. I got paid $5.35 an hour. I worked almost every day after school plus the rush nights, Thursday to Sunday, every week. I worked hard in there, in a shitty fucking sweaty, hot, smelly environment to get shit right and get it to the customers. I came in early on days when I didn't have school to make sauce, make dough, do kitchen prep, etc. After a while of this I went to my lazy ass boss and said, hey Pat, I do an awful lot of the work around here and I think I deserve a raise. Pat said, okay, we'll see what we can do. Fast forward to next paycheck, sure enough, I got a raise, 5 fucking cents per hour. 5 cents. I said fuck that, went to Pat again to put in my 2 weeks. She told me how entitled I was acting and how my job title of line cook was a minimum wage position. I might as well have been the manager considering she took off promptly at 6 p.m. every night, her 8 hours were 10 to 6 weekdays, didn't work weekends, and left me and the crew to handle dinner rush. Anyway, long story short, I quit on the spot after the entitlement comment, walked inside to grab my shit, told the rest of the crew what happened, and everyone else walked out with me. Everyone. Both her drivers, both the other line cooks, and even the drunk fucker who was our dishwasher. Within 6 months that pizza shop, which had been in my town for at least a decade, possibly longer, was a hair salon with a new owner.
SearsSucksBalls says, I worked at a place that provided parts and home services. I started a quitting chain there. When I started, we had an awesome manager, dude was funny, and took his job seriously. So as an employee, It was awesome to come to work and have a laugh with the boss, then get a no-nonsense, no bullshit explanation of what was expected for the day. And then he finally got his promotion. Awesome for him, shit for everyone else. And here's why. The company is failing, especially the home services area. Lots of people were let go just before the manager left. So now we've got a bunch of people doing double the work, for the same pay and rip-off hours. Work 7.5 hours a day instead of 8, that way they don't have to consider you full-time and pay benefits. The new manager was a total bitch. She got transferred from a different location because she wasn't getting along with her other employees. Yeah, give her another chance in a bigger store with more people. Makes perfect sense. So, I'm starting to get real angry whenever I come into work because I've been moved from front counter to the back. I actually like dealing with people and telling them the truth. According to new manager lady, I should be ripping people off. Lady comes in with a vacuum. My power head stopped working. I take it, plug it in, and hit the red reset button. Vacuum head works. Manager finds out and yells at me. Should have put that in to be repaired. You cost us money. Yeah, cause charging some mother $96 to press a button isn't just the shittiest thing ever. Anyhow, end up in the back doing some other guy's job. Turns out he was the king of pooch pounding, so I could actually do all the work they expected to take a week, in a day. They were also too cheap to replace my computer monitor, and replaced it with a barely working TV that was returned. So naturally, I brought in my Xbox and spent a lot of time getting paid to play Batman. Whenever the manager was coming, my buddy would make bird sounds and I'd change back over to the comp. Then, unfortunately, my grandfather passed, and I missed 2 days of work. When I came back, I was yelled at for a long time about it from bitchy manager. Whatever, she's just stupid. I go on about my day and keep working. Everyone comes up to me. Did she just yell at you for mourning your grandfather? What a bitch. The next day begins, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy for me. Stupid bitch calls me into her office to give me shit about being so far behind, and then I lost it. Basically, if someone close to you passed away, would you come into work? She replied with something about my grandfather's death being my fault, and I saw red. I fucking lost my shit. I called her a fat fucking cunt of a whore for sure, because my friend told me it was hilarious. I said a lot more than that though, and left. About 30 minutes later she picked a fight with someone else, who quit. Then a few front staff quit. Then a few data entry people quit. A week or two goes by and more of the backside has quit. Another week or two goes by and friend A has quit. A few days after that, friends B and C have quit, and that's a major blow since the dumb bitch manager was relying on friend B to run the front and friend C to run the back. Last I heard, the company finally fired stupid bitch. Whatever, they did it to themselves. The company is dying and I'm happy it is.
Luciferwalks says, used to work in retail and a girl and guy started doing inappropriate things in our meat cooler. People started finding out after the first girl got upset after the guy took another girl in there. All three were fired for pulling meat in the meat cooler.
TheGreatUsernameToo says, not my job since I'm still in high school, but the scandal at said school. Back in 1992 a pregnant girl got voted to be homecoming queen, and I live in a pretty conservative suburban city in Wisconsin, so the faculty of my school, at the time, weren't very happy about a teen soon-to-be mom representing their school, so of course they did the usual ballot rigging where they burned all of the pregnant girls' votes. Well, somehow they got caught, and obviously the city school district caught wind of it and fired everyone who was part of this little conspiracy, and I actually go to one of the biggest schools in western Wisconsin, so a lot of people got fired, and that's how the mass firing happened. Fun fact, I got bored one day and decided to look my school up and found it has a Wikipedia page and an article on there that talks about the scandal towards the bottom. Also, it's the only time my school's ever made it to national news, as stories were done on it. Edit, fixed a typo.
EmilyamI says, I was working retail and many of the workers engaged in mass exodus because the only manager anybody really liked quit. The way it happened was this. One employee was a recent hire. He basically got the position because two of his friends already worked there and vouched for him. He regularly slacked off, got caught taking extra breaks, was never around when anybody needed him, and was generally a waste of space. One day, the manager everyone loves is on duty. He sends this kid out to collect carts from the lot. Now, a big group of this kid's friends had just arrived in the store. The kid goes and finds another employee and says, "Hey, the manager told me to tell you to go get carts out of the lot," and proceeds to follow his friends around the store doing nothing. Manager sees the other employee collecting carts and asks him why he's doing it, as it's not his usual duty. "Oh, so-and-so told me that you wanted me to get carts." Manager, knowing the kid has a record as a piss-poor employee, is furious. Hunts him down in the store and takes him to the office for a reprimand. After the reprimand, the kid leaves out the front of the store. He brings back 2 carts over the next 20 minutes. Finally, manager notices that we are completely out of carts. It's now been half an hour since he reprimanded this kid and sent him to the lot. So he goes outside to see what's up. Kid is leaning against the front wall of the building on his phone with his girlfriend. Manager fires him on the spot. The kid goes to HR to get his last check the next day. Sits down with the HR manager and says that the manager everyone likes is selling drugs to employees, many of whom were minors, on work time. Then goes outside and calls the manager's work phone and leaves a message that he's going to fuck him up for firing him. The whole store goes nuts. There are accusations flying from management at everybody. Every single employee is pulled to HR and interrogated. Did this manager ever sell you drugs? Have you ever seen him sell someone else drugs? Have you ever seen him use drugs? Have you ever heard him talk about using drugs? No, 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 no. And everybody they talk to points the finger at this disgruntled ex-employee. Everyone knows he started the rumor mill going to try to get back at this manager. The manager plays the recorded message for management that this kid left on his work cell, but they dismiss it because there's no way to know it's him. Grilling continues for 3 or 4 days. Some people are pulled in for multiple interviews. Gossip starts that they're going to fire this manager. They don't have any solid evidence against him, but this ex-employee and his 2 friends who still work at the store have provided stories that match one another. Well, no shit, they hang out every day and these interviews lasted almost a week, enough that they think the manager needs to be fired. Manager doesn't wait for them to do it. He walks in one day and says, "Fuck this, I quit. I drafted my letter of resignation when this shit started. Here's my keys." About half of the employees on shift walked out right there when he did. Almost everyone else quit within the next week. The last I heard, the only people who didn't quit were the 2 friends of the kid who never did his job.
Whoistcmt says, does Amazon count as an event for the murder of Borders Books and Music? That being said, Borders higher-ups had no idea how to staff a company, how 40-60% coupons can impact their bottom line, and how to merchandise a store. RIP. Speaking as someone who worked for Borders, and actually does merchandising for a very respected company.
Xanthin_Chunky says. Aircraft manufacturing job, laid off after 9/11. The loss of the Twin Towers, by use of jets built by the company I worked for, lost hundreds of orders, slowed our rate and subsequently laid off 40% of our workforce over 3 years.
Aimanti says. In the summer of 2012 I was working at a Boy Scout camp when one of the senior counselors, who had worked at the camp for years, I think 5 to 7, came out as gay and was immediately fired by the council. This caused a massive uproar at the camp, and about half the staff ended up quitting in solidarity, including many of the area directors and the program director. The rest of the summer was definitely interesting, because we had to run a proper summer camp with 50 to 75% of our normal staff, even after new people were hired on to fill some of the emptied positions.
eNaRDe says. Worked at a Toyota dealership, new racist manager was brought in from corporate headquarters. Within a year he got rid of everyone that was black and Hispanic.
Ethanyelad says. Worked a restaurant and we had 4 staff members leave when they found out one employee was promoted. The only reason she got the job was because she was fucking the GM. She was fired within the month for doing heroin on the job and now has a baby with a juggalo.
Zip says, I worked at Wendy's. One of the shift managers quit for personal reasons, so the regional manager had all the other shift managers cover the now open shifts. The shift managers were now working overtime and didn't want to. They gave the regional manager a deadline of a month to get a new shift manager. A month goes by and the shift managers confront the regional manager because there's been no replacement. Turns out he hasn't even posted a job listing yet. They were so livid that all of them quit on the same day. Now the regional manager had to take all the shifts until he could hire new people, and he did a terrible job too. Normally 4 to 6 people were working at a time at our location because it wasn't dead slow but wasn't a hot spot. 6 usually only hitting for a few hour overlap during expected rushes. With him as manager, he expected 7 people to be working always. This means he increased all of our hours as well and had no respect for the hours people usually worked. This caused another mass exodus of normal workers, including me, because I didn't want to work full-time while going to school.
Lars_Vincent says, once, a few people got fired and or suspended from where I worked because of their involvement in a Super Bowl pool. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and it all could have been avoided if the guy running it wasn't so brain dead. He was openly trying to recruit people to buy boxes on this grid he needed to fill. He was even asking managers at a company where gambling pools are forbidden. The company warned him about the rules, asked him to keep all talk of the pool outside of the building, and suspended him. When he delayed payment of the prize money to the winner of the pool, the first place winner said he would punch his lights out if he didn't get paid. They fired both of them, and a few other people were suspended for their involvement.
Chalfcast says, Boss sexually harassed 2 girls. On the same day. He moved from one to the other after the first one told him she wasn't interested in having sex with him or being his mistress.
Oliver 36 says, my mom used to work for a college. She started there as a secretary when the college was just starting out and gradually moved up until she was running the whole business department. Without her knowing, the college ran interviews and hired a woman to be her superior. They never asked my mom to apply for the position and never mentioned it to her until the day this woman is introduced to her, and my mom's boss informed my mom she was supposed to train this woman to be her boss for the department. My mom was clearly hurt and upset, but she needed her job and just couldn't quit, so she sucked it up and trained this woman while putting on her best face and being cordial. All the rest of the people who worked under my mom in the department could not stand this woman and were incredibly upset by the situation, as well. One morning, my mom walks through the doors, and the boss of the college is waiting for her. He brings her into his office and fires her. Within the month, the rest of the department all quit, as well, leaving them to hire and train all new people right before fall semester started. 6 months later, the woman they hired to replace my mom quit, and they had the balls to call my mom and ask her back. You can guess where she told them to shove it.
Not Alana says, I was hired by a man who owned 3 pizza chain stores. I trained at one store, worked there for a few months when I found out he wanted me to transfer to a different store, and after a few weeks become the manager. Woohoo. Well, the new store, the current manager, every single day spent a few hours on the phone with her, so, screaming and yelling and crying. Right in front of customers. The employees would get high in the walk-in fridge. I'm actually not too bothered by that if they actually did any more work than the total minimum. So here I am, hired by the store owner, not the manager, who had hired all her friends. They didn't like me. They called me a bitch. A goody two-shoes. They were absolutely right. I fired them all, except for one new girl that started there the week before I did. It was a glorious moment, the most bitchy moment of my life. Motherfuckers won't help me mop the floor, you're fired.
Shut Up He Explains says. Competing company in a similar but not identical line of business tried for years to replicate our product with no success. They scrapped the project and took the RD money and bought our company instead. Fired 600 plus people in one day. I was one of them. I hear from those who remained the place is awful now.
Morgana says. Remember Walden Books, the bookstore in the mall? I had a friend who worked there as a store manager. They hired him to clean up the store. It was a total wreck, dozens of unopened shipment boxes crammed in the back room, behind the cash wrap, even under shelves. He found new releases from 3 months back that were never available to buy. It was really, really bad. On top of that, the district manager who hired him told him he had 3 weeks to get the store in order without extra hours and without sales dropping. If you've worked retail before, you know this is impossible. My friend argues with the DM and the DM basically tells him he doesn't care if they work half the clock to get it done, it will be done or he'll turn the entire staff, fire them. So for 3 weeks my friend and his staff worked 24/7, only clocking in 4 allotted shifts. My friend would even sleep in the back room in a sleeping bag. And miracle upon miracles, he got it cleaned up before the deadline. The deadline comes and the DM comes back with 2 LP operatives. They start pulling the staff one by one to the back and grill them until they get them to admit to working half the clock. When they get to my friend, he tells them outright that the DM told him to do it, and the DM sat there and denied the whole thing. So he says to the LP guys, how else would we get this done within the deadline time allotted? You knew what this store looked like before and you know how much time we had. The ELP guys just looked at each other, then fired the entire staff. That same day a manager and 3 associates were hired. The DM already had them in the wings and was just waiting for my friend to get the store in working order to pass it off to his friend.
ReeseFelg7 says, I don't know what counts as mass. Borders had a round of emails to management boiling down to if you would not do this job for free, then quit. So a lot of people did.
Jace100 says, not a non-mass walkout, but sort of snowball effect. I worked for help desk that had pretty awful management. It didn't seem too bad when I was a grunt. After I got promoted to a tier 2 is when it became abundantly clear that management had no idea what they were doing. It started pretty simply, when I asked if I would get any training on how to do my new position. I was told that it was on-the-job training. Which is fine, if that's what they actually gave me. What they meant was figure it out on your own. That was annoying, but if that was only issue, I wouldn't be posting this. The wheels slowly started coming off. A couple people left, another got promoted out of the department. They never hired people to fill those places. Instead, they blamed my team for the lowered productivity. After about 6 months of declining productivity and management convinced the issue was with the team, which was now down to half its original size, they instituted a policy where we had to report everything we did to management, in real time. This was the beginning of the end for me. The proverbial straw, for me, came when they instituted a no-talking policy in which we had to ask permission from a supervisor to speak. I left the company shortly after that, and so did about 80% of my team. Last I heard, they'd only replaced one of the 5 people that left around the same time as me.
Deleted says, late to the thread, but it's probably for the best, because this is going to come off as egotistical. In college I worked for 2 grocery stores so that I could get full-time hours. One was a much bigger retailer, and the other was a smaller store that only had a couple dozen locations in the state. The first job will always go down as the worst job I ever had. It was dehumanizing. Do not talk, do not move from this spot. They dictated what you could say to customers, and the head manager spent his entire shift in the office watching the cameras. From the day I was hired until the day I quit, I never said 6 words to him. I had to get the second job because due to the economic downturn the store began cutting hours, to the point I went from 39 hours to 10, if I was lucky. Worse than that, I was only ever scheduled for 3 or 4, and they'd tell me to be on call as if I were a doctor or firefighter. They'd call during school hours, which they knew, and when I couldn't come in they'd use that as proof I didn't really want the hours. The second job didn't have enough hours to go around, but the manager was a really good guy, easily the best manager I've had, and would try to pencil in people where he could. Things changed at the start of the new year, where the second store had seen higher profits and better performance than other stores in the area, and as a result were getting better funding and attention from corporate. Suddenly we had more hours to spare and the money to hire more help. They offered me a management position and I took it, but my first job was suddenly determined to make me see through my 2 weeks' notice, so I tried to honor that. I had been at the first job for 2 years, and knew all of my coworkers. I had a good reputation because I kept people laughing, made the shifts go faster, and just got along well with everyone. When I put in my 2 weeks, I had a lot of them asking where I was going, and if they were hiring, so I went to my other manager with their names and applications, to see if there was anything he could do. He hired 13 new employees straight from the competition. I worked that job until I graduated, and some of those employees are still there. At one point, the first job offered me a position in management with a pay raise. I told them I'd call them and let them know. Told my other manager what they offered me, he did $1 better.
Gershron says, my team of 5 was asked to replace a major piece of software that was critical to a large revenue-generating department in 11 months. Normal timeline for implementation is 18 to 24 months, and we were on the larger side of facilities going to his software. We were already understaffed, and over the year we worked countless overtime hours, traveled to the software vendor for training many times, and got the project ready on time. Go live was a mess of 12 straight 16+ hour days, but eventually we had the system in and stable, and it started to make the department better. The staff were promised bonuses for meeting the deadline and not slipping the date, to be paid out from unused project funds. Despite hitting the go-live date and having more than $1 million left in the project pot, the IT team was criticized for most of the issues that happened during the 12-day go-live. The team lead was dismissed and no bonuses were paid out. Within 3 months, 3 of the 4 remaining members left, and all the positions are still unfilled. The one who was fired got multiple job offers the same day, and the 3 who left all got multiple offers within a month of the project ending. The team lost 30 years of experience in a week, simply because management wasn't willing to protect them. Ironically, the manager who threw the team lead under the bus was canned 6 weeks later.
Bounced says, I work at an advertising agency in South Africa. We once had to do a Christmas/festive season card for one of our major mobile networks, Mountain. The concept was to show a summer road trip, an image of a map with stops at some of the major tourist attractions in the country. The idea being that wherever you go in South Africa, Mountain has you covered. At each stop they gave a quirky description of the fun you could have there. A team then had to take the same concept and create a Christmas card for Mountain Swaziland. Swaziland is a tiny landlocked country within SA, that's very badly run by a terrible king with 15 wives. The team created a card showing the tourist spots in Swaziland and made a quirky comment about seeing all the king's 15 wives spending like there's no tomorrow at a local mall. Needless to say, the card actually ended up going to King Mswati himself, who was very insulted. Swaziland is incredibly poor and the king is incredibly rich and abuses with his wealth, but doesn't want to come across that way. The king insisted that people were fired over the incident. People at Mountain lost their jobs and we told Swaziland that people had been disciplined over the incident, while really we all just thought it was ridiculous.
Zerby says, we saw the way the company was going. Suddenly contracts weren't being renewed and then people were getting fired for silly policy violations. Then they said we can't do raises this year, things like that. It was obvious they were getting ready to do mass layoffs, so most people walked before it happened. Sure enough, the week before Thanksgiving we were all given 2 weeks notice and told our jobs were now in the Philippines. Since I was in the IT department I was given an extra 4 weeks to help clear up, but I got a lucky break and so started a new job with much higher salary before the 2 weeks were up. The funny epilogue is that about 6 months later they wanted to hire me back with a 25% pay raise. I guess the outsourcing didn't work out so well. I politely told them where to shove their job.
Boatman 666 says, I worked at a summer camp and one of our kitchen staff members was fired because a helicopter mom thought that he had been rude to her precious little snowflake. So the staff all got together and a strong majority agreed that the snowflake had been a rude little shit in most of the classes/activities and deserved to be told to sit the fuck down and eat what everyone else has. So about 2/3 of the staff marched down to the camp office and sent in a representative who told the directors that if he goes we all go. The operations director claimed we couldn't get solidarity and this was just a stunt by 2 or 3 of us, but when he came outside he found 25 of his staffers with bags packed and ready to roll. The kitchen staffer was serving waffles the next morning like nothing had happened.
Smoke Tech says, I worked for an airline as a mechanic. We had a 727 cargo jet in our hangar for months undergoing a D-check, a massive inspection and maintenance task that involves removing and replacing a lot of aircraft skin and structure, as well as wiring, equipment, etc. It is basically a massive overhaul of the aircraft. While this task is ongoing, the aircraft is lifted up on jacks that fit under the wings, nose and tail of the aircraft. Anyway, back to the skins being replaced. Lots and lots of panels were riveted into place over the course of weeks. Lots. When the day came to lower the aircraft, because all of the work was done, someone in charge forgot to place anybody on the tail jack. As all of the other jacks were slowly lowered, the tail jack suddenly punctured the mounting point at the tail, and basically opened the tail like a zipper. It sounded like machine gun fire as the sheared rivet sprayed across the hangar. Within minutes, every person standing in that hangar was fired. Just about everyone was hired back the next day, but at that moment, some pretty important people lost their jobs permanently.
Creeping Seller says, some workers tried to organize a union in a manufacturing plant I worked in. They all got fired within a week for other reasons. Also, random drug test day.
Eddie_8711 says, 7 years back we had an office Olympics. Each team had to come up with a team name and a flag for their team. A team chose the name Team Shockers. They made a flag with 2 hands doing the shocker sign. They called me in, office pervert, and showed me the flag. I told them you can't put that out. The guys said we checked with the team manager and he said it was okay. It was up for over a week with no problems. Apparently one of the older office ladies asked someone what it meant. All hell broke loose. The flag was taken down pretty quickly. HR got involved. 3 employees and the manager were fired. They had all been with the company about 10 years. Worst part was we didn't even get to compete in the office Olympics. Lots of shocker jokes since that happened.
Big Mikey Likes says, the payroll supervisor embezzled millions from a non-profit organization for mentally disabled people and really fucked us over.
Bam-BamBoyles says, I worked for a pretty famous hotel in Virginia Beach. Some of you may have heard of it, the Cavalier. The original hotel was erected in 1927 and a new hotel was built across the street in 1973. I worked in the banquets department where we sat and ran parties and events at both the hotel and one of our many banquet halls. Some of the people in my department had worked there since the 1950s. One little old lady I worked with had been there since they had renovated the old original building and before they had even erected the new modern hotel across the street. Up until 2 years ago the hotel was run by Mr. and Mrs. Dixon, who made their fortunes running kyanite mines. Well, some of the Dixon family members sued Mr. and Mrs. Dixon on the grounds that they were not getting their fair share of the money. When the verdict came down they had to liquefy all of their assets. While they kept a hold of the mines, the hotels were auctioned off to the highest bidder, who just so happened to be Bruce Thompson of PHR/Gold Key Resorts. Now Bruce for the past decade or so has been buying property all over Virginia Beach and with his wealth has been funding politicians and people of power and influence to gain favor in the local government. As of today he has the mayor, the governor, and many city councilmen on his side due to his funding of their campaigns. With all that power and influence, Hess been able to raise the taxes of the people in VA Beach to get city funding on all his development projects, so his company spends little of its actual money to do anything it wants really. When Bruce finally finalized the deal for the hotel underwent a gradual shift from a family-owned company to a corporate machine. Our breaks were cut in half, many departments were terminated with no notice. They literally hung a sign up on the door telling out painting and maintenance department their services were no longer required. Me and the people in banquets went untouched, except our then boss, but that's an entirely different story. Seeing as most of our money in the non-tourist seasons came from weddings and parties, we all kept our jobs and actually got a pretty good increase in hours due to us now having to do the functions of all the departments that were let go. So if we had no parties to set for, we were painting parking lots or clearing out basements. Well, this continues for a few months until the next fall. The banquet team was tasked with setting up a room with 50 rows of chairs, about 500 chairs or so in all, in our main function hall. After we spend most of the morning setting this room up, we are told to wait in the room for our next instructions. As we're sitting there, we start to notice more people that work with us start walking into the room. Now, we weren't idiots, we know what the hell was going on, we've all been expecting it for months. So a representative of the company comes up and tells us what we all knew, since they were doing a complete renovation of the hotel and all the surrounding area, including buying out people's mortgages. They no longer needed to keep the hotel open, thus no longer needing the workers, and in one fell swoop they let everyone go. The president, who had been there for 30+ years starting in the banquet department, the little old lady who had spent most of her life in the hotel, the college students trying to make enough money for education, and me, the banquet captain, who was looking forward to an unemployment check. TL, Dr. Local Property Mogul buys historic hotel I worked at and makes us set up the room in which we would be terminated. Edit. I may have lost my job, but at least I now have my first gold. Thank you, kind stranger.